The kindergarten keep entry assessment was revised in February of 2018. The webinar that you'll watch is going to reference several page numbers throughout that may be different than the new test administration manual. Just refer to the box at the bottom of the screen where you'll see the current updated page numbers and not necessarily the ones that are mentioned aloud in the webinar.
Great. Okay, so hopefully you've all had some time to go ahead and check those materials needed prior to this training. We do apologize that we aren't able to give those to you because we are, of course, not in the same place as you. So again, you'll need that one copy of the student scoring sheet, which looks like this. And then you'll need one copy of the TAM, which is the teacher assessment manual, which looks like this. And then you'll also need a copy of the student materials, which looks similar but is turned on its side. And then one copy of the question 5 accommodated materials, which looks like this. So hopefully you're able to download those 4 documents prior to this training, or at least during the beginning when we're discussing, you might be able to still do that. But again, you just go to that web address on your screen and then click on the kindergarten tab, and it should show you all 4 of those materials as well as other things that we've posted throughout the time. We did update the scoring sheet, so the updated scoring sheet is online, so you should have access to that as well. There were some things that some people requested and gave us feedback to fix, so we went ahead and fixed those as well. So Sid, do you want to get started? Swap computers, or are you good to go?
Yes. Okay, send that to the board. All right, so
How about we change seats?
yeah, let's switch seats. So we're going to go ahead and switch seats. There we go. Oh, there you are at the top answering questions.
Oh, great.
Perfect. Okay, so we first wanted to get started with talking about the KEEP, the kindergarten entry and exit profile, and introductions of ourselves. So I'm Sydney Carter, and I am the Assessment Development Coordinator here at USBE, and Sarah Wibke.
And I'm Sarah Wibke. I'm the K-3 Literacy Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education.
And so you can see our agenda for the next couple of hours is really to look at the purpose and overview of the KEEP, to look at what exactly is the reason why we're administering this assessment that's a common assessment for the whole state. And then we'll jump right into looking at every item that's on the assessment. We'll look at sample items as well as show videos of when we went out along with some of our colleagues to practice the assessment and learn from administering this assessment. So we'll show some of those sample items, and then we'll give you a chance to practice administering the assessment. We'll show the one student from beginning to end, and you'll get a chance to work through on scoring that student. And then we'll jump into talking about accommodations and what accommodations are acceptable and allowed for different students on each item. As well as the very last thing we're going to do is to look at the data entry procedures, and we'll talk through how do you enter your data into the data gateway. And so then we will, if you have questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat box, and Sarah or I will work on responding to those as we go along the webinar today. And just as for your information, that there are no stipends available for today. So we're glad that you're here and you're becoming a test administrator so that you can go on and train any other test administrators, but there are no stipends available today. So our learning intentions for our webinar today are really twofold. The first is that you will be able to see the purpose for administering the KEEP, as well as you'll be able to observe and have opportunities to observe the assessment in action through some videos. So your success criteria are that you'll be able to identify the purpose of the KEEP assessment, you'll be able to navigate through the KEEP TAM, and you can administer the KEEP with fidelity. So the purpose for the KEEP is really, there are 3 different reasons. First, it's really to identify students that are in need of early intervention and instruction, and so we can promote differentiated instruction for all students. We really want to be able to use this information to identify what is the most effective instruction for students, and to highlight places where students are making great growth, and to to look at what instructional practices and strategies are being used to be able to help all students across our state. And then finally, we're using this data. The purpose of the KEEP is to be able to understand the influence and impact of full-day kindergarten. So we're able to look at our OEK opportunities, the optional extended learning for kindergarten, to look at students who are at risk, both in the short term and the long term, and how the OEK impacts those students. So we also are using the KEEP to be able to provide insight into current levels of academic and social emotional performance upon entry to kindergarten. So this is not new. The kindergarten assessment pre and post has been in state law for quite some time. What is changing is that we have a common assessment across the state. So we can start to look at trends, we can start to look at data, and that you're able to look at your kindergarten students to determine where their social emotional needs are, as well as their academic needs in the classroom. It's also meant for you to be able to provide some data-informed decision-making at the local level, and for you to be able to look at cost-benefit analysis, and for us to look at cost-benefit analysis of early learning initiatives, specifically that we look at our pre-K and then our kindergarten and determine what's working and where we can make some improvements. And then also to analyze the effectiveness of those OEK programs and preschools. So if you have a touch of some trouble sleeping at night and are looking for something to help put you to sleep, you are welcome to read Board Rule R277-489. It is very technical reading, but it's the board rule that talks about the KEEP assessment, the pre and post assessment for kindergarten. But really in the board, it's very specific about the things that KEEP cannot be used for. And one of those things is it cannot be used for teacher evaluation. So when you're looking at the data from KEEP, and if a teacher is concerned that that data would be used against them as far as a teacher evaluation, that is specific in the board rule that it cannot be used for that. It also cannot be used to admit a student for kindergarten. We can't look at if the student is ready or not for kindergarten, they get to come to kindergarten. So it's not a kindergarten readiness assessment. We are keeping all students no matter whether they are ready or not. So if they're the right age to come to kindergarten, it cannot be used as a gateway to whether they're ready to be admitted to kindergarten or not. It also cannot be used for grade retention or grade promotion. So you can't have a kindergarten student that comes in and takes the KEEP assessment and you say, this kid is ready for third grade. So we can't be using the KEEP for a grade promotion. We also cannot use the KEEP for grade retention. So at the end of kindergarten, if we say, you know what, the student is not ready, it can be looked at as data and you can analyze how students are performing at the end of the year, but it cannot be used for grade retention solely. And finally, it cannot be used for early enrollment into kindergarten. If a student is 5 before September 2nd, they can come to school in the state of Utah. If they are 4 on September 2nd, they still cannot come to school until their age dictates that they can come to kindergarten. So can't be used for early enrollment. Let's see if we can move this screen. So the big spot is a little bit smaller. Sorry, we'll get that little picture out of the way. There's still some gray dots coming up, but a little bit.
That's better.
Okay, good. All right, so the kindergarten entry and exit profile is a required assessment. It's required to be administered in its entirety. So you have to make sure that you are administering all 14 questions, that they are administered with fidelity, and that you follow the TAM with each item. So each kindergarten student will see all of the 14 items. There are discontinue rules in many of the items, so if a student is unable to perform on that task, there are discontinue rules to help move through that quickly. So we're not putting any undue strain on the student or on the test administrator. But it is required to be administered in its entirety. Now, as we look through the assessment, you may think, well, our kindergarten district or our kindergarten assessment in our LEA, we have this one question that we really love this question. We really want to still keep this question and ask the students that in our test. That's okay as long as it is at the end of this assessment. This assessment has to be given in its entirety, and then you can add additional questions if you would like to, but that data will not be collected at the state level. So it's okay if you would like to add, it is not okay to take away. So every item that is here needs to be administered to each student. If you add something, it needs to be done at the end so that we have common data points for all students across the state. And those students that have additional questions aren't looked at differently because they had questions at the beginning and then they became tired or something to answer the other questions that the rest of the students are answering. So needs to be done at the end if you are going to add additional items. And as with any other assessments in the state, that the test administrator is expected to follow the test administration and the testing ethics policies, which means that before administering assessments, you need to do that once a year ethics policy training that you follow to make sure that we are being ethical in our test administration. So there we go. A little bit of the background on the development of this assessment. This started as an initiative from some superintendents that got together, and they initiated a call for development of a uniform kindergarten assessment because they wanted to start looking at data in a common way, and they couldn't do that because everyone was using a different assessment. And so the superintendents got together and said, what we'd like is to develop a common assessment so we can start to look at some comparison data and start to look at how really are our students performing in kindergarten, and is there areas that we can beef up our instruction, or is there areas that we can learn from other people? So that started in June of 2016, last summer. They got together a committee of teachers and district leaders, and that team of educators developed the initial items that were piloted in the fall of 2016. So last fall there was a pilot assessment that several LEAs and charters participated in with their kindergarten assessments, and after they piloted that assessment, they realized, this is something we probably would like to do with common data across the state. And so that's when USBE got involved, was in about September of last year after that initial pilot. As USBE got involved, we invited university experts to come and weigh in on the actual assessment and what was there, and then there was a refinement process, and so we worked with the feedback from those university experts to create a few different items. So we adjusted what had been piloted last year, and in November and December we worked on refining those items, and then we invited over 175 charter schools and district and school leaders to come in and provide additional feedback and more refinement on those items. That was in January of this year. And then from February to May, we worked on refining each of those items and piloting those with different students to see, does this language make sense? Do students have confusion about what the task is they're asked to accomplish? And finally in May, we had the finalized feedback and printed the TAMs that you can see on your screen or in front of us here today. And so this summer, we went around to 17 different locations. This is our 18th presentation, and then we have one more extra presentation next week. So we did about 19 presentations or trainings across the state this summer to try and train all of the kindergarten teachers as well as any literacy folks or assessment people that were interested in being trained on administering the KEEP assessment. So that's the timeline and our background for development. So as far as what is in the assessment, the design of the assessment, really our goal is to measure school readiness. So we said this is not a readiness assessment in the case that if you're not ready, we're not going to take you, but we really are looking to determine, are kindergarten students coming to kindergarten ready for kindergarten? These assessments for the this beginning of year questions, these items, are based off of an alignment to their early childhood standards. So kindergarten teachers will look at the standard that each item is aligned to, and some of them may say, well, this is not our kindergarten standard, and they would be right because these are aligned to the early childhood standards. When we develop the post-assessment, each of those items are aligned to the kindergarten standards. So you'll see that it makes sense. We don't expect a student entering kindergarten to be mastering the exiting kindergarten standards. So we're using the preschool or early childhood standards to align each of the items that we're assessing to. We also, as we were trying to determine which would be the best items to assess, we looked at each of these standards and said, what are standards that are could be measured, so something that we could write an item to. And then we also looked with a second lens of what are the indicators of greatest future academic success. So how can we look at each of these items that we can write a question to, and is that an item that we should write a question to because of its predictive ability? So we narrowed this design into 3 categories. There's a literacy section, a numeracy section, and a social emotional section. So the literacy section, there are several different items in literacy that you'll see up here that we'll go into greater detail in each one of these items, but the typical things that you would expect from early childhood and literacy. First of all, we're looking at oral language. Is the student able to communicate orally with the test administrator? And then we're looking at some alphabet knowledge. Does the student have letter recognition? We're also looking at writing letters, both letters in their names as well as a random set of letters. Phonological awareness is very strong in early childhood, so we're looking at, does the student have the ability to isolate first sounds, as well as do they know some letter sounds. And finally, we're also looking at concepts of print. Does the student have directionality? Do they know where they should start, which way they should go, a return sweep? And then do they also have the concept of a letter versus a word? So those are the literacy items that we'll look at. In numeracy, you can see with numeracy there's oral counting, everybody's favorite, so asking the student to count to 20 orally. There is numeral recognition, can they identify or recognize numbers? And also, does the student have some number sense? And then we also look at one-to-one correspondence. And within one-to-one correspondence, we are looking at quantity to numeral and cardinality. Sorry, let me freeze that patch because you guys can see that instead of us patching. Cardinality, quantity to numeral, and then the reverse of that, the numeral to quantity. And then finally, the last 2 items within numeracy are looking at quantity discrimination as well as shape creation. And then finally, there are 8 social emotional categories that you will be scoring separately. So the social emotional part of the assessment is an observation of the test administrator during that test administration only. So during that 10 to 15 minutes of administering the assessment, the test administrator will note how the student responds when they have opportunities to respond, or do they persist, do they have a sustained effort. So those 8 items are something that the test administrator will note at the end of that testing session. So even if the test administrator is administering this assessment after the student has been in school for a week or 2, and they have a little bit better idea of who that student is, this observation is based only on the time that they're administering the assessment. Also, the other thing with the social emotional part of the assessment is this is data that is not collected by the state. So at this point, we're asking you to do the observation. At some point, it may be at an aggregate level, not at an individual student level collected, but it's something that will just be information for the teacher and at the local level of the school. Okay, so the structure of the assessment. This entry assessment is a one-to-one administration, so the test administrator will be sitting with the student. It needs to be administered by a certified teacher, not to be administered by an assistant or a paraprofessional. So if the teacher is a certified teacher, they're classified as a teacher in your SIS system. That could be someone who would administer the assessment. We strongly recommend that the kindergarten teacher be the one to administer, knowing that sometimes you don't know the classes yet. Sometimes the classes are created after these initial assessments. But we strongly recommend having one or the kindergarten teacher administer the assessment. The assessor has to have attended a KEEP training, so if you're here online, you qualify for attending a KEEP training or have been to one of the 17 trainings that we've done so far, or you are also qualified now after attending this KEEP training to train other test administrators. So to be able to administer the assessment, they have to have been trained to administer it. It needs to be an optimal testing environment. So a quiet place, a place that feels safe for the student, and a place where there's not a lot of distractions or places that can be places that could be distracting for students. We want to make sure that it's an optimal testing environment. This is different than Dibble's assessment, so oftentimes we suggest with Dibble's that the assessor sits across from the student, and for this assessment we found that sitting beside the student was a better way to go, so that we're able to point to the materials. There are several times when the test administrator is actually pointing to the different letters, and we found that trying to do that from across the student or across the table was much more difficult than sitting beside the student. And then some options for student material upkeep. So we know with your student materials that 5-year-olds are not always known to be the cleanest people, and so we know that sometimes hands are not always the cleanest, and so that may end up getting a little bit grubby or have a lot of use and a lot of wear and tear on these materials. So we suggest printing on maybe a thicker paper, or if you're printing these materials, putting them in either laminating or putting them in sheet protectors, or taking a transparency or something and putting it over the top before you flip the page. Just something to help with material upkeep for the student materials. Okay, so the TAM, if you have the TAM in front of you, this is one of the things that on page 7, let me open my TAM. On page 7, it describes the testing window, and when we actually sent these to print in May, we had a change to the testing window after we sent these to printing. So you may see that the testing window in the TAM mentions that there's a 5-week testing window, and we actually extended that. So now this is the current testing window, so we need to update our TAM. But the testing window is 3 weeks prior to the first day that kindergarten starts, up until 3 weeks after the first day of kindergarten. So there's actually a 6-week window, and it all depends on when your kindergarten starts. All of that data is due to be entered into the data gateway by September 30th. So you should have a few weeks, a week or two after finishing, after that 3-week end of window, that you should be able to have some time to get all this data entered into the data gateway. The deadline for that is September 30th. And then for our exit assessment, the window will be the last 4 weeks of kindergarten, so a little bit smaller on the exit assessment. And the data is due to be entered into the data gateway by June 15th. So as far as administration, there are 14 scoreable items and then those 8 observational items for the social emotional part of the test. This is an untimed assessment, and so we don't want to have the students sit there all day. So we want to make sure that we are moving them along and not frustrating the student, but it's not timed, so they don't have to try and do everything within the 1 or 2 minutes. We did go out and pilot the assessment and test with several students from across the valley, and approximately 10 to 15 minutes for each student. So it was a fairly quick assessment for one-on-one. Really, I think we only had 1 student that was right around the 15-point mark, and most took 12-ish minutes to administer the assessment. So that leaves you plenty of time to be able to fill out the observational section after the student leaves, or talk with parents sometime if you're scheduling a 20-minute time with the parents to come in. But it is not a timed assessment, so it could go longer than that, but typically we haven't seen that. Okay, as far as preparation, what you should do to be able to prepare to administer the assessment is first to read the TAM. So look at this. I know it's maybe not necessarily exciting reading, but helping you become familiar with what exactly you can and can't say, what are the prompts that I can say in different items, or different questions, but familiarizing yourself with the test administration manual. The second thing, which all of you have probably done, is work with the test administrators in your buildings and the parents of the students that you want to establish a testing schedule. So this should not be something new. You've probably done this for years and years with determining this test schedule and scheduling time for parents to bring the student in to assess one-on-one, but working with your buildings to make sure that schedule is in place. And then finally, the last thing is to obtain and set up the testing materials that you'll need, which is to be a copy of the test administrator manual for the assessor, and then 1 copy of the student materials book. You also need 1 copy of the scoring sheet per student. And the scoring sheet looks like this. It's found on our website. It's also found in the TAM. It's Appendix B of the TAM. So the assessment scoring sheet, you'll need one copy of that for each student that you'll be assessing. Or the other option is to enter it immediately into the data gateway instead of writing it on a scoring sheet. Then the other materials that you'll need before you begin assessing are a pencil and a blank sheet of paper for the student to use. Oh, excuse me. And you'll also need a set of 7 basic counting manipulatives. So do not make the mistake that I did when the first time I was practicing. I practiced with my niece, was 4, is now 5. And I brought everything home except for manipulatives. I didn't bring any manipulatives home to practice the assessment. So all I had was gummy bears, and that's all she could think about was gummy bears when we were trying to do that portion of the assessment. So Sarah was much smarter and found pennies when she went to go do her assessment. But if you have any kind of counters or blocks or whatever other math manipulatives you use in your classroom, that would be great things to use, but you need a set of 7 of them. I think in the TAM it mentions to have 10, and that was just in case you end up losing one, but the most you need is 7. So you can see here's a copy of the materials, the test administration manual and the student material booklet. They look similar. The covers are similar, but obviously what's inside is different.
On page 10 of the Teacher Administration Manual, you will see that there is a parent questionnaire. Before inviting the child in to administer them the keep entry test, please take a moment to introduce yourself to the child's parent or guardian and ask them the questions that you see on page 10 in the Test Administration Manual. These questions are important to better understand a student's early learning experiences, and you will be entering this data into the data gateway. So please ensure that you either record it electronically as you ask the questions, or in Appendix C on page 33 of the manual, you will find a copy of the same parent questionnaire. It's important to note that if a parent refuses to answer the question, that's fine. Just mark parental refusal in the data gateway and leave the rest of the questions blank.
All right. Hello again, everyone. So if you are looking in your TAM and we turn to page 10, which looks like this, you'll see the opening task. This is not a scored item, and this is actually the only task that can be read in the student's native language, if you speak their native language or you have someone in the room that speaks their native language. So it's just a greeting. It's really prior to the actual assessment starting, and you would just say, my name is, say your name, what is your name, how old are you? And so it's just kind of a way to get to know them. I know most schools, when they're testing the kindergartners, they kind of walk them down to the hall to the testing environment and, ask them questions like, how's your day, that kind of thing. So this is all happening before the actual assessment begins. So again, that's completely fine. It's just a not scored item, and it is on page 10. If you turn, we're going to go to the literacy section of the assessment.
Okay. On question number 1, oral language, you'll see at the top it lists the content area, which would be English Language Arts, and it has the standard alignment of SL4 with prompting and support, describe familiar people, places, things, and events. The first section you find on each question is the instructions section. The script that you see here in bold is the script that the teacher is going to read aloud to the student. Anything that you see in italics in this section is what the teacher does. The next section below is the green section for scoring, and then there's accommodated instructions on the purple section, and these are for those students who have 504 or IEP plans already in place. And then down at the very bottom, you'll see the materials box, which shows you all of the materials that are needed for this question, and then a sample record of response next to it that shows you how to mark. So for question number 1, you would show the picture of the playground to the student and say out loud, "This is the basketball hoop. Now point to and name everything you know in the picture." After the student finishes his or her initial response or hesitates to respond, state, point to, and tell me what else or what you see in the picture. Count the number of accurate and reasonable responses the student provides and mark on the scoring sheet. In this situation, an accurate or reasonable response would be anything that the student sees in the picture. If they point to one of the boys or girls and says that's a boy or that's a girl or a child, it's acceptable. Sometimes students will confuse the pictures with longer hair as being either the incorrect or correct sex, but a response of boy or girl is acceptable. Now, after the student has finished giving you their responses, please ask them, now tell me what is happening in the picture, and then allow the student to respond and mark correctly on the scoring sheet. For this item, it is a scaled score for number of objects named and the storytelling portion. So under the green section for A, if they named 0 objects, they would receive 0 points. If they named 1 to 2 objects or actions, they would receive 1 point. If they named 3 objects or actions, they would receive 2 points. And 4 or more would be a score of 3 points. And for storytelling, the student would receive 2 points for telling a story using a complete sentence or sentences, and then 1 point if they only used words or phrases. And then if they did not tell a story, or they used disconnected statements that were not in any way related to the picture, then they would receive 0 points.
Yep. So the assessor will be giving the entire test starting here with question 1 in English. If the student responds in another language, then those are not marked as correct items. That the correct item has to be in English. And we were doing that because the language of instruction is English. And so, again, the only task that can be read in their native language is the opening task, which is on page 10 of your teacher assessment manual that has the name and age question. What's your name and how old are you? So just a heads up on that. So I'm not sure if everyone is seeing my screen. So if you aren't seeing my screen or you can't hear the sound, I will stop the video and we will figure it out. So please just let me know if you are unable, but we're going to show you a video of this and we'll actually be talking about how they scored. So let me know again if you're having issues. And I can't hear it, so I'm guessing you can't either. Let's.
It's a girl.
Is that better? Can you hear it?
It's a boy. It's a boy. And
Thanks, Tracy.
It is a girl. It's a girl. It's a girl. It's a boy. It's boy. It's boy. What else?
So you'll notice my tiny friend here just repeated boy, girl, and pointed to the different boys and girls in the picture. So he would only receive 2 points because he only named 2 different objects, a girl and a boy. And even though he named them numerous times, he still only gets the 2 points.
Now tell me a story about what is happening in the picture.
Everyone is playing.
And so his response was everyone is playing. And so, of course, because the points are if he speaks in a complete sentence or sentences, which he did in a complete sentence, then he would get the 2 points. So he did get the full 2 points for that second section of storytelling.
Point to and name everything you know in the picture.
Like when monkey has double basketball.
So I'm not sure if you were able to hear her. She said slide, swings, monkey bar, basketball, or hula hoop, and basketball. So she would have gotten the points for those things, and then let's listen to what she does for her second response.
Now tell me a story about what is happening in the picture.
The boy playing a goal swinging
So if you were able to hear her, she said the boy is sliding, the girl is swinging. So she was speaking in complete sentences, so she would also get the 2 points for that second section as well. Let me switch over again. Any questions about the oral language section before we move on? Feel free to put those in the chat box and Sid or myself or both of us will answer those as quickly as we can. And so we'll move on to question numbers 2 and 3, unless you have any other questions.
Did you mention about the scoring, that we're not expecting them to do the 30 points?
I did. Okay. Yes. Good. Thanks for the reminder. So if we turn now to the next question, we're going to talk about questions 2 and 3, which are on pages 12 and 13. And so question 2 is uppercase letter recognition. And so again, the instructions are in this top blue section, and you'll be reading the section in bold. And then, of course, you're displaying the student materials, which looks like this. And so you will say, I will point to each letter, and you will tell me the names of the letters you know. And then you'll pause to give them enough time to respond. There is a one-time prompt that you've all had this if you've taught kindergarten before, where they start saying the letter sounds and you're looking for the name. So there is a one-time prompt where you can say, just say the name. So you can prompt them for that. So you're marking incorrect and skipped responses with a slash or however you want to do that to indicate that they don't get a score for that one. There is also a discontinue rule. So when you're looking at the discontinue rule, if the student cannot name any of the letters in the first row, you can say, look at all the letters, point to and tell me the ones you know. The reason we're asking them to point at that chance, because if they just started saying letters, we wouldn't really know what they're actually looking at, and so we wouldn't know if they're giving a correct response. So making sure that the student, when they are, if you do run into that situation with the discontinue rule, go ahead and make sure that they point. If the student doesn't name any letters correctly, even at that point, you can just record a score of 0 and go ahead and move on to the next question. So again, there are accommodated instructions below. If you do need Braille or materials in large print, we do have those available at the Utah State Board of Education, so just let us know. We do have emails at the end of this so that you can email any of us and we can definitely get you what you need. And then question 3 is just lowercase letters. So again, this is what it looks like in the student materials. You'll notice because we have the uppercase and the lowercase separated, that the lowercase L, they cannot say I as a correct response. It has to be L because they're separated. I know it's a little different from Dibbles, but Dibbles has the uppercase and lowercase combined, so that's why it's an option. But because they're separated and these are only lowercase, the student should know that this is L. So L is the only correct response for the lowercase L on this section. So again, you're displaying that sheet and saying, I will point to each letter and you will tell me the names of the letters you know. And you will pause, and again, we have that same one-time prompt, just say the name if they start saying the sounds. The same discontinue rule, if they cannot say any of the letters in the first row, you can have them look at all the letters and point to and tell me the ones you know. And again, just 1 point for each correct letter named. And then we're going to move on to question 4. So question 4 is writing their name and letters. So this is on page 14 of your teacher assessment manual. And there are no student materials besides the pencil and the blank sheet of paper. And so you will give the student the pencil and blank sheet of paper and you will say, please write your first name. You'll notice in the video that the student that I was testing, I was introduced to him as Carter. And for his first name, he wrote Robert. And I have a very confused look on my face because I didn't understand why he was writing some other name. It turns out his first name really is Robert, but he goes by Carter. So kind of an FYI, you might want to be thoughtful of that and find out from the parents what do they think their first name is, because sometimes kids don't know their first name, they just know the name they go by. So thinking of that. So once they're doing that, you would say, now I'm going to write some letters. I want you to write the letters that I say. The first letter I would like you to write is T, and so then you go through all the letters and have them give them time to write those letters. Now when you're scoring this, when you're scoring their name, because we understand that, for example, Sydney's name is longer than Sarah, and so it would be unfair for Sydney to get more points simply because her name is longer. So what we did is they get 2 points for at least 2 correctly written letters. So my friend that wrote Robert, if he just wrote an R and a T, those are 2 correct letters in his actual first name, and he would have gotten the 2 points. 1 point for 1 correctly written letter, and then as far as writing the letters T through W underneath the name, it's 1 point for each correctly written letter. You'll notice underneath there it says a correct response may include upper or lowercase letters, so it doesn't matter if they write capital or lowercase, they're both correct. Reversals are okay, so if they write their S backwards, that's absolutely fine, or a varied letter formation. So we know that sometimes it's hard for a kindergarten teacher to watch a student write their S not only backwards, but from the bottom. It's very painful, I understand that. But it's gonna be okay, and it still looks like an S. So as long as it is legible and looks like the letter and doesn't have any extra lines or strokes in it, then it's fine. So for example, if they wrote the letter M, and instead of 4 strokes, they have 5, that would not be correct, but if they have the 4, and they're fairly straight, then that would count. So we do need your professional judgment when looking at these. So let's go ahead and watch the video. And again, if you're having issues seeing the video or hearing it, please let us know so we can make that change.
Please write your first name. Robert.
So if I go back a little bit, maybe you can see his name. So in this case, my friend Carter Robert would have gotten 2 points because he had at least 2 letters correct in his name.
Robert. Now I'm going to say some letters. I want you to write the letters that I say. Okay. Okay. The first letter I would like you to write is T.
T. Okay, that'll be easy.
The next letter is O. The next letter is F. Now write the letter M. The next letter is K. The next letter is F. The next letter is E.
Okay.
Now write the letter W.
Okay. That'll be easy.
So when looking at Carter Roberts' letters, we would have given him a score of 7 out of 8. Since he did miss that, hopefully you can see that M on your screen that looks like an M and W combined. So it does have that extra stroke, and so that one is not correct, but the other letters are correct. So let's watch another one.
Please write your first name.
Okay, so Isaac would have gotten 2 points again because he did have at least 2 letters correctly written in his name.
Now I'm going to say some letters. I want you to write the letters that I say. The first letter I would like you to write is T.
Oh my God.
The next letter is
So I'm just going to pause it for a moment and explain a little bit. So for your time, and because you've probably seen other kindergartners tested before and know that sometimes just watching them and staring at them writing those letters can take a long time. So we did try to kind of shrink the video and cut out some of the time. So it probably looks like I'm rushing him, but we cut out some of the lag time between when he was just writing, because you've all seen kids write. I don't think you need to watch any more of that. So just know that it does look like I'm rushing him, but I'm not. There's also a section where it will look like I didn't give him time to write the F, and so when we get to that part, I can explain that at that time too.
O. The next letter is S. Now write the letter M. The next letter is K.
What does a K look like?
The next letter is F. It's okay, you don't need that one just right now.
So hopefully you will learn from my mistakes and not have the letters out in front of them. That is on me. So go ahead and make sure you flip your student material sheet over so that they're not seeing those. So just a heads up on that. Clearly I made a mistake. And so learn from my mistake and go ahead and put those on the other side, flipped upside down.
It's okay. The next letter is F.
I'm going to K.
The next letter is E.
E. I'll put the K down here. Where's the K down at my name? Well, we're good at this.
The next letter is E. Now write the letter W.
Well, I'm good at that.
Let me back up a little bit.
E.
So when looking at this, the E came up on the screen just because of editing before he actually wrote it. So just kind of a heads up on that. He attempted the F, but he did not actually get the F down. So you'll see a lot of extra dots kind of around the E. That's what they're for. So I did give him time to do it. I know it looks like I rushed because of the editing, but he did get enough time to do it, but he was unable to make the F. So because of that, he still has the T, the O, the S, the M, the K, E, and W. So the only one he missed then was the F. And so he did get 7 out of 8 points also on that. So let's go back. So let's see if there's any discussion for questions 2 through 4 on the chat box. We'll give you a little time to go ahead and ask those questions, and we'll answer those as best we can.
So the question is, how do you respond when he says, what does that look like, or I don't know how to write?
Oh, yep. Also, in case you didn't hear the question, it was, how do you respond when he asks questions like, what does that look like, or I don't know how to write that? So you'll notice my friend Isaac says that on all of them and clearly is able. So I didn't actually give him any feedback. I just kept asking the questions as they are standardized in the book, as this is a standardized assessment. I know sometimes we get questions about what kind of feedback you can give them. So basically what we're talking about for feedback is the teachers are wanting to know, can I say keep going, or you're doing a good job, that kind of thing. So I want to be really mindful in saying that I want you to be thoughtful when you're thinking of doing that, because we want to make sure that you're not giving like Isaac or Carter any extra additive something that would make them do better than another student, or that would actually maybe cause an issue and have them do worse than another student. So we don't want to give them an advantage or a disadvantage when we're giving feedback. So if you do choose to give feedback, it has to be very generic in good or okay, just, you know, something basic like that. You'll notice in the videos, I didn't give them any feedback just because I just want to make sure everyone has the same experience, and it is a standardized assessment, so I don't want to do anything that I feel like anyone else in the state wouldn't. And so that's why I do it that way. Any other questions all right, great. All right, so let's move on to questions 5 and 6. So these are on pages 16 for question 5, and then page 18 for question 6. Page 5 is the one that, just for a brief moment, the accommodated instructions. If you want to mark in your booklet on question 5, again, that's on page 16. The accommodated instructions are actually incorrect. So we had to turn this into the prison much earlier than normal to get all the 2,000 copies made that we made for the training. So that we did find an error in that, so that is wrong. So that's why we have this extra sheet. That is the accommodated instructions for question number 5. So again, cross out the accommodated instructions for this question on page 16 and use these for your accommodated instruction if those are a necessity for the students that you are with. So the instructions for first sounds, which I'm sure you've probably all tested first sounds before, listen to the word mat. The first sound in mat is What sound? And then you pause, give them feedback. Now you tell me the first sound you hear in the word bug. So you're asking it again. If the student says the letter name or they're saying the whole word back to you, you can say one time just say the first sound. So you do have that one-time prompt available to you. Once you get past kind of the examples, you'll get to, now tell me the first sound you hear in these words, and you'll go through the 10 words. If you have a student that is unable to produce the initial sound of the first word, repeat the instructions. If the student is still unable to produce the initial sound, proceed to the next word. Mark incorrect and skipped responses with a slash through the first sound to indicate no score, and leave the correct responses unmarked. Record the number and correct responses on the scoring sheet. There's also a discontinue rule. Can you see my screen? It appears my...
Oh, nope, you lost your screen.
And okay, I'm going to go ahead and try and share that again. My apologies. Share my screen. Share.
There we go.
Okay.
Back up. We're back.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So the discontinue rule, that's where we're at. If the student cannot produce any of the first 5 sounds, record a score of 0 and proceed to the next question. You'll also notice in the video that we show you for this that the student is very confident in his responses, and he definitely gives an extra schwa at the end. If you're unfamiliar with schwas, you'll watch the video and you'll know what those are. And so if the student does produce those schwas at the end of the letter, those are still counted as correct responses, as more than likely they didn't teach themselves that schwa. It was probably taught to them, which is unfortunate and definitely something you'd want to write down for your instruction to go ahead and help them clip those schwas when you do actually have them in class and they're learning those things. So question 6 is letter sounds. And so you'll display this sheet. So I know sometimes we get questions around why are the capital and lowercase together. When teachers were giving us feedback, those over 175 teachers that we pulled in, they said we don't need to test the first sounds or the letter sounds on lowercase and uppercase simply because they're the same sound. And so they said just put them together not only for time saving, but also to give the student an extra beneficial chance, because maybe they have only ever seen the lowercase letters, or maybe they've only ever seen the uppercase letters. So kind of giving them that extra benefit. So you will say, I will point to each letter pair, and you will tell me the sound that those letters make. And so you're pointing to each letter, and the student is saying the sounds. You will pause up to 3 seconds for each letter pair to allow them to respond. And then, again, if they start saying the letter name, you do have that one-time prompt available to you to say, just say the sound. Now, there are some caveats on here. If the student gives a long vowel sound, ask if he or she knows the other sound. We are only accepting short vowel sounds as correct. The second one is, if the student gives a soft sound for G or C, ask again if they know the other sound and accept only the hard sounds as correct. And if you're a little bit less familiar with that, because C, of course, makes the K sound and the S sound, we are only accepting the hard sound of K, and then for G it would be G as correct. So just a heads up on those. And you're just, marking incorrect responses. There is a discontinue rule. If the student cannot say any letter sounds in the first row, you may say, look at all the letter pairs, point to and tell me the sounds you know. So it's very similar to the discontinue rules for letter naming. Again, 1 point for each correct sound, and again, we're only accepting short vowel sounds as correct, and the hard sounds for C and G as correct. So let's go ahead and watch the video on this.
Listen to the word mat. The first sound in mat is mm. What sound? Now you tell me the first sound you hear in the word bug. Bug. So first sound you hear. Now tell me the first sound you hear in these words. Top.
Top.
Not.
Not.
Chips.
Shut.
Fog.
Fuck.
Shell.
Shut.
Lake.
La.
Bat.
But.
Sit. Pan.
Pump.
Cup.
So again, you'll notice those schwas at the end. He added that extra sound on the word. So being mindful that either he was in a, I don't know if he, do you know if he was in preschool? I'm not sure. But I'm not sure if he was in preschool or maybe he learned that from a neighbor or a daycare or a friend. But again, those are still, he did get all of his points. He did get all the first sounds. So we're not taking off any points for that extra schwa, but it is something you do want to take into consideration with instruction and make sure that you're teaching him to go ahead and clip those schwas so he's not making that extra sound at the end of each letter, because when he starts blending, that's going to be a problem. When he tries to blend the word and each letter has the at the end, it's not a d, ug, it's just a d, ug. So being mindful of that as well.
I will point to each letter pair, and you will tell me the sound those letters make.
E.
Just say the sound.
N. S. B. T. P. A. J. Z. J. E. E. G. O. A. R. A. Y.
So you'll notice that first he said C for that first letter, and so Sid went ahead and gave him that one-time prompt, just say the sound, and then he did start saying the sounds. You'll also notice when he got to E that he said the long E sound, and so I'm not sure at that time if we had that extra piece in the instructions, because when we were testing, the test wasn't quite done yet, so heads up on that. So if that was in there, Sid would have just asked him, what's the other sound for E, to see if he does know the correct sound. So he would have gotten that one wrong. So he did get some wrong. It was mostly vowels, and I know V got wrong, but so he did get a few of those wrong. And it looks like we have a question.
Not to me.
Oh.
Maybe it just went to you.
Maybe not yet.
So if you had a question, will you send it either to me, Sydney, or to everyone so we can see that question?
I can't. It doesn't let me.
Head back. So if there are any more questions for questions 5 and 6, which was first sounds and letter sounds, just let us know, and we'll go ahead and answer those. Page 20 is question 7, directionality. And so when you're looking at this, you would be showing the students this sheet of the girl holding the balloons. That's the student sheet. Oh, they can't? Oh, okay. Oh, so sorry. So when you're displaying the student materials, you would say, before I read this sentence, which would indicate that at the end you're going to read the sentence, point to where I should begin reading. So allow the student to point to the text. Show me which way I should go. And then if the student doesn't return sweep, you can ask, where do I go after that? And so you don't necessarily have to say that third section, that third piece of where do I go after that if they already did the return sweep for you. So again, you're marking correct if they point to the first word, and then of course they show the movements from left to right, and then the return sweep. When they're done, you'll say, now I'll read the sentence to you, and you read the sentence for the little girl. Question 8, you will be showing them the section that has the number sign or hashtag if you're younger, the hat, and square, C4, and then the random symbols. So when you're looking at that page, you would say point to the box where there is just one letter. And so you're hoping, of course, that they point to the letter C. And then you would say now point to the box with one word. And again, the correct response is if they point to the word hat. So we're...
By 10.
So if they're pointing, I know some kids will point to the number 4 instead of the C. That is incorrect because it's a number instead of a letter, so that will give you a lot of information when you're looking at that. Let's look at the videos, and again, please send your questions in the chat box and we can go ahead and answer those as we go.
So, before I read this sentence, point to where I should begin reading.
Yeah.
And now show me which way I should go. There you go. Now I'll read the sentence to you. The little girl is holding a bunch of balloons.
So you'll notice in that situation he did get the 3 points, 1 for where to start, 1 for which way to go, and 1 for where to go to next, as he did show that.
Before I read this sentence, point to where I should begin reading. Before I read the sentence, point to where I should begin reading. Now show me which way should I go. Where do I go after that?
So you'll notice that Jen forgot to read the sentence. So, reminder, make sure you read that sentence. None of us are perfect. We all made mistakes when we were doing it. So I'm sure you'll have tested more than a few kids as we each did. And you'll probably be much better at it than we will. But you'll notice that she was doing a little finger thing. She had a hair on her finger, so she wasn't trying to do magic or anything. She just had a hair in her finger and had to get it off before she could respond. You'll also notice that she was pointing to the picture, the actual balloons, instead of the text, and so she didn't actually get any points for that section, as she was not pointing to the text.
Point to the box where there is just one letter. Now point to the box with one word.
So, again, when looking at it, he pointed to the 4, so the 4 would be wrong, but then he pointed to hat, so the hat would be right. So any questions before we move on to question 9? So we're looking for, again, questions on 7 and 8, which were directionality and then concept of letter and or word, before we move on to question number 9. Any? Great. So let's move on to numeracy. So we're looking at rote counting. Good news, when we are looking at the exit assessment, and hopefully you'll cheer from behind your screen here, but we're not going to have you listen to the student count to 100. We have a better way of testing that, so woohoo, you won't have to sit there. I know it's a little arduous. So yay for that. So for this one, the directions are start at 1 and count to 20 out loud. You'll notice that out loud to some kindergartners means yelling. So you might want to just kind of scoot away when it's that time because they get a little bit louder in the section. So you're just listening to the student count up as high as possible to 20 and record the last number the student said correctly before and they're up to 20. So the number of points are awarded to the highest number reached correctly before they made a mistake. And so you'll notice down on the sample record of response, you'll notice that student counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they made an error at 7, so that student would only get 6 points because that's the number they were able to count correctly without making a mistake. If you have a student who was counting to 20 and then continued, you can go ahead and say thank you and ask them to stop because you don't need them to go past there. And if they don't stop and you've asked them several times, then you can go ahead and mark that in their social emotional section as well. Question 10, which is numeral recognition, and so you would need the student sheet that has the numbers from 0 to 10 mixed up. So you would display that sheet and you would say, I will point to each number and you tell me what number it is. And so again, you're pausing, giving them some time to go through, you're pointing, and they're telling you the name of the number. And again, you're just marking in correct responses and seeing how many they actually got correct. So let's show you the video.
Start at 1 and count to 20 out loud.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 14. 14, 17, 18,
That's great.
So you'll notice that he got to 12 without making any errors, and so he did get 12 points, but once he got to 13 and up, he was a little bit off there, so he only got the 12 points. Recommendation also, if he lost his tooth that day, go ahead and put that aside before you assess.
I will point to each number and you tell me what number it is.
3, 4, 7, 5, 2, 7, 8, 9, 11, 4, 7.
So you'll notice he got quite a few wrong, and so he would not have gotten the full points on that. And if you did notice, we do have some people who ask us about the number 1. They ask if any kids say 7. We didn't have any kids when we tested say 7, but again, if that becomes an issue, and we gather feedback from the state and they say that, again, 5,000 kindergartners said that was a 7, then we obviously need to change it. Now understand that we do want your feedback. We absolutely want your feedback on how the kids did. What I would ask is for you to discriminate between the feedback that affects children and the feedback that you just don't like it. Because if you just don't like the one, we're not going to change it for that reason, but we are going to change it if it does affect students. So just being very mindful when you are sending us that feedback. We do want it if it is something that affects students. So let's escape out of here. And let's move on to number 11. So question 11, I'll just give you a heads up on that right now. Question 11 is probably the trickiest question, and we get the most correct questions surrounding it. So I'll try to be really clear when explaining it. Question 11 is on pages 24 through 25. And when you're looking at it, it's the one-to-one correspondence, cardinality, and quantity to numeral. So you have a set of counters, manipulatives. I used pennies, typically that are used in your classroom. You will display 4 of them in a horizontal line formation, and you will say, use your finger to count these objects, and then you'll listen as the student counts and watch. Now tell me how many there are, and you'll pause for the response, and then you'll show the student materials number sheet that we were just looking at for question 10, and you'll say, point to that number here. So for scoring, and then after that you repeat with 7 counters. So you start with 4 objects, and then you go to 7 objects. So when looking at that for scoring down below, for scoring the one-to-one correspondence, they can either get 2 points, 1 point, or 0 points. And so if the student counts the objects correctly using one-to-one correspondence, they get 2 points. However, if the student counts using one-to-one correspondence but with an error in counting, then they get 1 point. So we'll show you some students, and this will make more sense when we're going through it, and I'll explain a little bit more then. And then 0 points if the student is unable to count using one-to-one correspondence. Same thing with 7. For cardinality, how many? It's 1 point and the student tells how many objects they counted. So it's really important to listen to the they counted section, because let's say the student was counting and they had 7 objects out, but instead of the 7 objects, they said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they counted one of them twice. They still have one-to-one correspondence, but they made an error, so they don't get the full 2 points for one-to-one. They only get 1 point. But then when you ask the student how many, they should be saying 8, because that is how many they counted. So if they said 7, then I would worry and they would get it wrong, because that's not how many they counted. And then when they're pointing to the number, they should have pointed to the 8, because that is how many they actually counted. So again, it's how many they counted, that's how many they need to say, and they need to point to the number that they said they counted. So hopefully that's as clear as mud. We'll go ahead and show you the videos that might make it a little more clear. Oh, and
Yep, we went closed out of there.
Okay. Let's try that.
Right here. Use your finger to count these objects.
1, 2, 3.
So you'll notice that because instead of pointing, he was stacking them, that he stacked number 1 or number 2 on number 1. So then ineffectively he skipped it. And so he wouldn't get the full 2 points for one-to-one correspondence. He would only get 1 point because he was using one-to-one correspondence, but he made one error.
Now tell me how many there are.
3.
So he gets 1 point because he did count 3 and he did say 3.
Point to that number here.
Here.
So you'll notice I'm pausing it right here on purpose because you'll notice he's not actually pointing to a number, he's just pointing to a random space. And so he would not get a point for that. So again, just to kind of recap, when he was stacking, he missed one. So he does have one-to-one correspondence, but he missed one. He made an error. Now, if he would have made several errors, then he doesn't have one-to-one correspondence. But we understand that kids might make one mistake. They might make one less or one more. And so they would still get the 1 point for one-to-one correspondence, but not the 2. For cardinality, he said 3 because that's how many he counted, so he got 1 point for that. And then pointing to the correct number, he did not, and so he got a 0 for that.
On the sheet. Count these objects.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7.
So this time he did count correctly without any errors, and so he does get the 2 points for one-to-one correspondence.
Now tell me how many there are.
7.
So he said the right number, he gets a point for that.
Point to that number here.
And so again, he just pointed to a random spot on the sheet. He didn't point to a number, so he didn't get any points for that last section of quantity to numeral.
Use your fingers to count these objects.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now tell me how many there are.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So with this student, with Isaac, for one-to-one correspondence, he does get the 2 points because he did count correctly. But for cardinality, when we asked him how many, he just did the same thing over again. So I don't really know if he understands the last number he says is 4. So he didn't get any points for that.
Point to that number here.
So he did point to the number 4, so he did get a point for quantity to numeral.
They're cold. Okay. Use your finger to count these objects.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So in this situation, he has one-to-one correspondence but counted the 1 twice. So because of that, he only gets the 1 point.
Now tell me how many there are.
8.
So he gets 1 point because he counted 8, and he did say 8. That is how many he counted.
Point to that number here.
And he does point to the 8 on the sheet, so he does get a point for that as well. Okay, so if you have any questions, if you could please put them in the chat box. We are taking questions for 9 through 11, and that would be rote counting, numeral recognition, and then question 11 was one-to-one correspondence, cardinality, and quantity to numeral all in one. So go ahead and put your questions in the box for those. Any more questions? No? All right. Questions 12 and 13. So we have numeral to quantity and quantity discrimination. So question 12 is on page 26 in your TAM, and you'll be using the sheet in your student materials that says it's for question 12, and it has a 3, 8, a 2, and a 6 at the top. And you will point to the number 3 and say, this is the number 3. Point to the box that has 3 dots, and you're hoping the child points to the box that has 3 dots. And then you move on, point to the numeral 8 and say, this is the number 8. Point to the box that has 8 dots, and so on and so on. So you'll go through 3, 8, 2, and 6. They get 1 point each for correctly displaying the quantities. Most of the kids did pretty well on this. Some of them mixed up the 6 and the 8 just because they saw they were a lot, and so they picked those. If you have a student who stops to count them to find out which one is 6 and which is 8, that's completely fine. They would still get it right. Oh, sorry. And then 13 is quantity discrimination, which is on page 27 in your teacher assessment manual. And you would turn in your student manual to the sheet that it kind of looks like buttons. And you'll notice that it is labeled top of page, so that we want to make sure that you are understanding which end we're going from. And if you had the page flipped, you might get different answers than we did. And so displaying that sheet and pointing to the first row, and you would say, tell me which one has more dots, this one or this one. So you're pointing to the first two, and then you go and repeat with the second row, and you say this one or this one, and you go to the third row, the fourth row, and so on. So again, when doing that, if they point to the one that has the most dots, they get it correct. If they don't, they get it wrong. If they point to both of them, because they don't think either one, they obviously probably don't really have quantity discrimination, and so they wouldn't get any points for that one as well. We sometimes have gotten asked if you can cover the sheet and show only the top row when you're doing that, and so on. The question is no, because it is not in the TAM, and this is a standardized assessment. We do have to give it the same way in every school across our state. That you cannot use a sheet to cover up the answers when you're doing this. So you do have to show the entire sheet, but because you're pointing to them, it shouldn't be a big issue. So let's check out those videos.
This is the number 3. Point to the box that has 3 dots. This is the number 8. Point to the box that has 8 dots.
Well, I'll have to count these dots.
That's okay, you can count them.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8.
This is the number 2. Point to the box that has 2 dots. This is the number 6. Point to the box that has 6 dots.
So you'll notice that he did stop and count, and he did get all 4 answers correct.
Tell me which one has more dots, this one or this one?
This one.
So you'll notice that he clearly has excellent quantity discrimination, because he pointed to, I don't know if you can see this or not, but he pointed to the third row, the one on the right, or the left, I'm sorry, it was my right, because that has the most dots on the whole sheet. So I understand he gets it, but I'm talking to him about the first row. So you'll notice I say this one or this one again for the top row to make sure he is understanding I'm only talking about that row.
This one or this one?
This one.
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 So he did get all 5 correct. He does get 5 points for that one. So now we're going to move on to question 14. Question 14 is the last one for numeracy, and it is on page 28. It is shape creation. And so when looking at that, the reason I know we sometimes get asked why shape creation and not shape recognition. Shape recognition is not predictable of future academic success, but shape creation is, so that's why it's shape creation instead. So you would give that piece of paper and that pencil back to the student, and you would say, draw this shape. And so you're looking at the student manual, and you would point to the square, and you would say, draw this shape, allow them to draw the shape. Then you'd point to the triangle and say, now draw this shape. And so you're going through and pointing to each one. They get 1 point for each correctly drawn shape. Now understanding that we do need your professional judgment on this one as well. To be correct, the student must demonstrate the properties of the shape. So if they draw a square that has 4 sides and 4 corners, but it looks a little more rectangular, that still counts. They still get points for that. So let's go ahead and look at the videos for that.
I'm going to do some paper and pencil, and I want you to draw this shape. Now draw this shape.
you might have heard in there say, oh. So the reason he has 5 shapes, but there's only 4, when he drew the second square, that was when he was attempting the triangle, and he made a mistake, so he was allowed to self-correct, and that's where he made the triangle. So he did fine. He did get all 4 points. He's actually, I think it's pretty amazing that he looked at the sign and noticed that it's a little bit darker and blacker, and so he thought, oh, it's a little more 2D, 3D, so he went ahead and drew it like that. He does get the points. The main purpose for that one is we want them to draw the intersecting lines. So if they draw it and it looks a little bit like an X because they tilted it, that's fine as long as the lines are intersecting. And if the circle looks a little more like an oval, again, that is acceptable. We understand that they're not, perfect artists, but if it resembles that again, we need your professional judgment to decide if that is an accurate portrayal of that shape or not. So, any questions on 12 through 14?
Yeah.
All right. So once the assessment is complete, and this is on page 30 in your teacher assessment manual, you will thank the student for participating in the assessment and assure them that the kindergarten experience is going to be fun and full of learning, and then you can dismiss them and walk them back to their parents. And then the testing administrator would continue on to complete the social emotional skills observation inventory immediately following the administration. So that is on page 31. And you'll notice there are a possibility of points 0 to 3, but again, this is just for your information right now. We are not collecting this in Data Gateway currently. So for number 1, opportunities to respond, were they confident in their opportunities to respond? Were they reluctant? Did they refuse? Or did they just give you no response at all? So understanding that those are some of those. So again, you're going through this when the student is not in the room once the assessment is done. I already went through that. And then we're actually going to do some scoring practice, and so I'm very much hoping that you have had time to print out the test administration manual, the student materials booklet, and the scoring sheet, because you will need one of each of those. We're going to have you practice scoring. We call them Carter number 2 because we have 2 Carters. The scoring sheet is also in the appendix on page 37 in your teacher assessment manual. However, the updated one is alone on our website. It is not in the TAM. So we did update that with what people were asking us and said, this would be better if, and so we went ahead and made those changes. So we'll look at the Carter video. Just give me a moment to pull that up.
My name is Jennifer. What is your name?
Just one second. And again, since we are switching videos, if you have a hard time seeing this or hearing it, please let us know. I will tell you he is a very shy child, and so he is a little bit more quiet. And so if you can't quite hear him, we will talk about what he actually scored so that you will know kind of what he actually said. Understand that obviously if you were the one sitting beside him, you would be able to hear him just fine. But just because of video purposes and our microphone broke that morning, which is unfortunate, we weren't able to get the sound any better than it is currently.
My name is Jennifer. What is your name?
Carter.
Carter. It's nice to meet you. How old are you?
4.
All right. Are we going to turn 5 soon? Excellent. All right. We're going to look at a picture first. Point to and name everything you know in the picture. What other things can you name?
Rope. Slide. Swing. Monkey bars. Basketball. Jump. Cat.
So hopefully you were able to hear him. He said swing, monkey bars, slide, rope, and then he also said jump and catch. And I think he said ball. I'm not sure if I named them all, but he did have a total of 8 things that he said between nouns and verbs, so he would get a total of 8 points. If you have any questions on that, please let us know. And we'll move on to the section on oral language where he's telling the story.
Now tell me a story about what is happening in the picture.
She's hula hooping.
So if you heard that, she says she is hula hooping. And we actually had a lot of kids that thought that was a girl just because of the long hair. It's a boy, but that's fine. He still gets the at least 2 points again because he did use a complete sentence and he actually goes on to tell a few more things.
Keep jumping over. Keep going down the street.
You remember?
Mm-hmm.
He's doing the monkey bars. He's playing catch and throwing it into the basket.
So if you have any questions on the scoring, again, for the oral language, point, and name, he had a total of 8 points, and then for the storytelling section, he did get the 2 points for using several complete sentences.
Now we're going to look at the letters. I will point to each letter, and you will tell me the name of the letters you know.
O, B, A, C, X, P, S, E, H, T.
Okay, let's try the next one.
R, N, E, D, F, L, Q, P, A, I, Q.
So I should have warned you, but you may notice that when our friend Carter doesn't know one of them, he just does a little shrug, which is adorable. But it's kind of hard if you're not watching the video to know that, oh, he actually went ahead and didn't know those and let us know. So as far as item 2, he missed W, K, Y, J, U, and V. So he had a total score of 20 out of the 26. And now we'll move on to lowercase.
Great. Okay, let's look at some more letters. I will point to each letter, and you know the name of the letters you know.
S, O, P, A, Q, W, E, S, I, K, Y, R, Z, G, I, S, Q, Y.
So again, you notice he shrugged when he was unsure. So he did, for item 3, he missed B, M, H, F. For L, he said I, but again, because the lowercase is separate from uppercase, that is incorrect. He missed N, Z was wrong, V was wrong, and U. And so he had a total of 17 out of 26 for the lowercase letter recognition. And so we'll move on to name writing.
Good job, Carter. Thank you so much. Now we're going to give you a paper and a pencil. And this time, please write your first name.
So you'll notice that Carter, he knows that E has some lines, but he's just got some extra ones there. But he did get at least 2 of the letters in his name correct, so he does get the 2 points for name writing, and we'll move on to writing letters.
Well done, Carter. Now I'm going to say some letters, and I want you to write the letters that I say. The first letter I would like you to write is T. The next letter is O. The next letter is S. Next letter is N. Oh, now write the letter S. The next letter is K. The next letter is F. The next letter is E. Now write the letter W.
So go ahead and pause it there. So remembering that it's okay if they start from something other than the top, as long as it looks like the letter, and it is okay for them to use upper and lowercase. So you'll notice that he was correct with T, O, S, and M, but then the K, you'll notice that he just made that little section of the K and turned it in. So that one was incorrect. The E, he had an extra line, or F, he added an extra line, 2 extra lines. So that one's incorrect. And then the E, he added way too many lines, but he understands that F has less lines than E, so that's good to note. And then he got W. So he only got 5 of the 8, and again, he missed the K, the E, and the F.
Thank you. Listen to the word mat. The first sound in mat is what sound? Much. All right, now tell me the first sound you hear in the word bug. Good. Now tell me the first sound you hear in these words. Top. Not. Just the first sound. Just say the first sound. Not. Chip. Fog. Shove. Lake. Bat. Sit. Pan. Cup.
So he was able to get all 10 of those first sounds correct. He did self-correct on the N because at first he just said not and he repeated the word, and Jen gave him that one-time prompt of just say the sound or just say the first sound, and then he did. One thing that I would note if I were testing Carter is I would make note that, for example, on CH, F, and SH for sure, I remember he said the sound more than once, so he said ch, 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 and so I understand that, yes, most kids might be okay with understanding that, well, but really when you're sounding out a word, the F only says once, not 3 times, but your low kids are going to have a hard time with that. So be really mindful when you're teaching the sounds. I understand you're giving the f 3 times so that they really hear it 3 times over, but helping them to understand that when you go to sound out, like the word fish, it's not sh, 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 because then it's not going to blend into the word fish. And so just being really mindful of that. If you are hearing that during the testing, you might want to make a little quick note about that so that you can go ahead and help them understand that when they're going to blend.
One letter. This time I will point to each letter pair and you will tell me the sound those letters make. Here we go. Oh, let's start over. I will point to each letter pair and you will tell me the sound those letters make.
So you'll notice when Jen started, she realized, oh, he's saying the letter names, and so she used the one-time prompt, and then he did continue on with the sounds. But right away when he said the C says S, she should have prompted him right there and said, do you know the other sound? Because we aren't accepting the soft sound, or we're not accepting the soft sounds, we're only accepting the hard sounds, and so she should have asked him on that one. She did ask him on the G, but he didn't know the other sound, so he didn't get that one either. So he missed C, he missed the sound of B, P, V, E, G, L, W, and Y. So he had a total of 17 points out of 26 for the letter sounds. And then if you have any questions, again, put them in the chat box. And we're going to move on to item number 7.
Before I read the sentence, point to where I should begin reading. Now show me which way I should go. Where do I go after that?
So you'll notice Carter, kind of like the little girl that Jen tested earlier that we showed you, he's pointing to the balloons in the picture and he's not pointing to the text, so he didn't get any points for concepts of print.
Point to the box where there is just one letter. And now point to the box with one word.
So for the concept of letter, he did point to the box with the C, so he does get a point for that. And then for concepts of print word, he did point to the word hat, so he gets another point for that. So then we're going to turn our page and move on to numeracy.
Okay, now we're going to do some counting. Start at 1 and count to 20 out loud.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
All right, I will point to...
So you'll notice the out loud there. He turns out he's not shy, but he got all the way to 20 without any errors, so he did get 20 points total on item 9, and now we'll look at item 10.
Each number, and you tell me what number it is.
3, 7, 2, 0, 10, 8, 9, 4, 6.
So if it was kind of soft, you may have heard him, he got all the numbers right except for 5. When he got to 5, he said 10. So he only got 10 out of 11 points for item 10, numeral recognition. And then we'll move on to item 11.
Alright, now I'm going to put the object in front of you. Use your finger to count these objects.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now tell me how many there are.
12.
Point to that number here.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to see and hear that. So for number sense one-to-one correspondence for the number 4, he got 2 points. For cardinality, he got 1 point for number 4, and then for quantity to numeral, he pointed to the number 4, so he gets another point for that.
Use your finger to count these objects.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Now tell me how many there are.
7.
Point to that number here. Very good.
Okay, so he again got full points for one-to-one correspondence, cardinality, and quantity to numeral. He did get all of those correct, so he did get full points for the 4 and the 7, both of those items.
All right. This is the number 3. Point to the box that has 3 dots. This is the number 8. Point to the box that has 8 dots. This is the number 2. Point to the box that has 2 dots. This is the number 6. Point to the box that has 6 dots.
So if you were able to see that, he pointed to the box with 3 dots, 2 dots, and 6 dots, but when it got to 8 dots, or the number 8, he pointed to the box that had 6 dots. So he did only get 3 out of 4 correct on that one because he missed 8.
We are on the last thing. You ready? Yes, we have 2 more. Tell me which one has more dots. This one or this one? This one? This one? This one or 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 this one?
So you'll notice on the first 2, he pointed to both, and he thought both had the most, and so he missed the first 2 rows. But then on rows 3, 4, and 5, he did get them correct, so he does get a 3 out of 5 on that item.
Now, I'm giving you back your paper and pencil, and I want you to draw this shape. That's okay. Now draw this shape. Now draw this shape. Now draw this shape.
So I'll stop right there. He did get the square, the triangle, the circle, and the sign, so he does get all 4 points for shape creation.
This section is going to talk about data entry and what to do with all the student data that you've collected from the KEEP assessment. You will need to input this information into the data gateway. Here is a website for you to use to navigate to enter your data. A couple things to note. You will need a username and a password to log on to the data gateway. If it is your first time accessing it, you can click on the register button, and it also provides you a link if you forget your password. There is a helpful document here that's noted on the screen for registering in the data gateway. That should be able to help you navigate through any questions that you might have in regards to using the data gateway. We will also be creating a separate tutorial that will specifically show you how to navigate through the data gateway once we have completed all of the updates for the entry assessment. We'll post that link for you to watch, and that will give you specific help and information. Who can enter the data into the data gateway? As you know, the assessment has to be administered by a certified teacher. But as far as data entry, it's really a local decision, whatever your district decides. Kindergarten teachers will automatically be able to enter the data, but other district personnel may be given access from the assessment director, and the role that those personnel would need to be assigned is assessment school user.
Okay, as far as using the data, some ways that you can use the data. The first off is to distribute students into different classes. So whether or not the student may qualify for your OEK opportunities, or whether you want to distribute different types of students evenly into classes for extended learning opportunities or OEK, or just to actually make your classes for kindergarten. That's a potential use for this data. The other thing that you can use the data for is to determine whether students may need early intervention. So you may look at a student and see, okay, based off of this pre-kindergarten assessment, we know this student's going to need some help with letter naming or with their phonemic awareness. But it may give you some early ideas of how you might intervene with that student. Excuse me. It may also help you to determine students who may be ready for some enhanced instruction. When we come into kindergarten, we have a wide range of students in kindergarten. So it may give you some guidance as far as the student may need some enhanced instruction and how can I work more closely and differentiate my instruction for that student as well. And it also may be a place where you can look at where you might target instruction for your whole class as you're planning the year to determine, okay, you know what, my whole class was fairly low in this area, so I may want to spend a whole lot of time with this, or my whole class may have really nailed this, and it's only going to be a small group of students that I need to work on this particular element of instruction, or it may be an individual student. So it may help you, this data may help you to determine areas that you may focus your instruction for individual students all the way up to your whole class. All right, as far as allowable accommodations, in the test administration manual, in Appendix A, there's an accommodation section, and this accommodation section is the same accommodations that are allowed for any assessment in the state. So this is on pages 33 through 36 in your tab. And, excuse me, typically the accommodations are something that are for students that have disabilities. So these accommodations are allowed for students typically that have IEPs or 504s. We know that in some cases in kindergarten they have not been identified yet, and so they don't have that instructional plan in place yet. So with the accommodations, knowing that these accommodations are not for all students, they're for students with specific needs. The other thing we wanted to note about accommodations are that there are Braille and large print versions of this assessment available, and if you require those, then you can contact Tracy Gooley. Her email is posted on the page right now, and she has access to those Braille or large print materials if you have students that require those materials. Okay, as we mentioned at the beginning, as far as the oral translation accommodation, this is part of the accommodations policy, and the directions say that oral translation of the directions involves immediate rendering of directions into the student's native language. So directions refer to only non-content, non-item content that appears at the beginning of the test or between testing sessions. It doesn't refer to the item stem or directions for answering specific questions. So if, once again, the only thing that can be translated is the oral directions at the beginning for that opening task. After that, we're looking to determine what does the student know in the language of instruction, and so we want to make sure it's in English, and we want to see what that student knows and how we can help support that student. All right, there is an alternate assessment available. Now, the alternate assessment is for students with significant cognitive disabilities that are unable to access the regular kindergarten entry and exit profile, so the regular KEEP. The alternate assessment is for the 1% of students. So it is very rare that you'd be administering an alternate assessment, but there is an alternate assessment available. It's based on the kindergarten essential elements for ELA and math and the alternate achievement standards. So with this assessment, it requires the look of the alternate assessment is that the student are students who require extensive, repeated, direct, and individualized instruction that support the measurable gains for the grade and age-appropriate curriculum. And this would be determined by an IEP team. So this is not like an accommodation for a student who just every student who has an IEP or every student who has a 504. That's not the alternate assessment. That would be accommodations. The alternate assessment is for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and it would be determined by an IEP team. But if you do need that assessment, so if you do have students that fall into that category, that is available on our assessment website under the kindergarten tab. All right, as far as opt-out, this is an assessment that is not allowable to be opted out from. And then I'm going to keep this posted up for a little while, this screen with all the different emails. So once again, my name is Sydney Carter, and Sarah Wibke are the people who were presenting today. But you can also see if you have other general questions, people you may contact. Shannon Ferentz is our elementary math specialist, and Jennifer Thronson is our K-12 and library media coordinator. And then you can see our partners in our special ed department for the accommodations or the alternate assessment, Tracy, Tanya, and Crystal, that you can contact. And we will be posting a link in the chat box in the next couple of minutes for you to click on that link for the survey for the scaled scores, and we would love, love, love to hear your feedback. So if you have any other questions, you're welcome to email us individually or throw them in the chat box now, and thank you for joining us today on this webinar.
Thank you. And then I think if we put the link to the alternate training for people that want to go. Yes. If you have that on your computer, I just didn't know where it was.
Yep, I do.
And Tracy already responded with the other link.
Okay. Let's see. This is different from the beginning to the end.
Oh. So I'll just kind of speak to some of these if you're, it seems like you're still there since you're in the chat box. So one question was, how do we measure growth if the assessment is different at the beginning and the end? So it's the way the Center for, is that what they're called, Center for Assessment? The Center for Assessment can psychometrically match the beginning of year and end of year to show growth, the same way that we show growth from third grade SAGE to fourth grade SAGE, and those are not the same tests either. So it's we don't do that. That is not our background. We lovingly ship that out, and the Center for Assessment will get us that information. And then I think so Sid already put up the link, sorry, for the scaled scores. That we would be very happy if you filled that out. And also, you may have seen in the chat box that Tracy Gooley put up and just mentioned that it's the same link for this training as it is for the alternate training. So if you want to attend that, it's from 3 to 4 today. And then we're getting some other questions. Oh, is the alternate assessment training recommended for everyone? It is recommended for people who are over special ed or people who have 1% students maybe in their classroom and are going to be giving that assessment to those students. Is there any type of Jennifer, yes, this is the end. You're welcome to stay or go. I'll leave that up to you. Is there any type of certificate of completion for this training? No, there is not, but thank you for asking. You're welcome to make your own. And thank you.
And I think, yeah, Tracy answered about the alternate key.
Oh, yep, Tracy answered that. Okay.
And we're glad the webinar worked out for you. Thank you for joining us today.
And this will be posted at some point on our website so that if you have people that haven't been trained yet, you're welcome to, and I see Hillary and I are on the same spot here. We will put it up so that you can view it again as many times as you need. And again, that way you'll have also our emails so that you can always check in and get us those questions that you want answered. Any other questions, continue to put them in the chat box. We'll remain here for the next few minutes to go ahead and make sure that all your questions are answered. And again, feel free to email us if you're not comfortable putting it in the chat box. And if you are done and all your questions are answered, you are welcome to head out.